Hi, welcome to another episode of Montana Shares. I'm your host, Bill Crane. Today I have Ed with the National Institute of Money and State Politics on. I normally use a tagline that says the nonprofits that make our state so great, but you actually make our country so great. Tell us a little bit about National Institute.
Thanks, Bill. The National Institute on Money and State Politics, our website is followthemoney.org. We usually use that for introductions. It's a little bit shorter. We compile state-level political donor information from all 50 states. That means we go to each of the disclosure agencies in each state, and we collect the donors that are reported by political candidates to state legislators, to gubernatorial candidates, to the party committees, to ballot measure committees. And we take all those names, all those donors, and put them into one database. This allows a cross-state, national analysis of donor and voter trends. The Institute, the reason we're doing this is, one, because the internet has allowed us to do it, but also we're at a time in the history of this country that the empirical evidence that is available can actually lead to some new and innovative looks at how our campaigns are funded, how many people fund the candidates, whether or not they're small donors or big donors. We actually are applying the data to scholarly analysis that looks at the election processes, whether they're competitive. So the mountain of empirical evidence that we build every 2-year election cycle, and it's upwards of 8 million records every 2 years now from the state level and federal level candidates, that mountain of data is really driving some serious thinking about the underpinnings of our democracy, how our elections work, how our public policy processes work, and how we might tweak the system to make it healthier in the future.
So what are some of the most important accomplishments we've worked together for like 25 years or something, right?
We have. You were there from the beginning, Bill, helping us out.
And so you said 8 million records every 2 years now.
That's correct.
So you're managing like, I don't know what, 50, 60 million records or something?
We're over 100 million records
100
now,
okay.
And with new state-of-the-art data architecture allows us to post all of this on the web. Our greatest accomplishments, I look back to 1999, 2000 election cycle when we, for the first time, put data together from all 50 states that had never been done before. Nobody else in the country is doing this. This little organization in Helena, Montana, has, at that time, created the first 50-state database of donors, state-level political donors. That was phenomenal. To do it then the next election cycle, and to increase our integrity and the speed that we could get that data. And then the next cycle. So here we are, 16 years later, and we are now collecting data for independent expenditures at the state level. We're doing things like best practices and reporting, helping disclosure agencies adopt 21st century disclosure practices as well as programming. We're working with attorneys who are fighting and defending or opposing campaign finance cases in the courts. I did expert witness analysis for Alaska and Montana cases this year, and our data's been cited before the U.S. Supreme Court 6 times. So when I say accomplishments, our accomplishment was getting the data in the can the first time, bringing the quality up to a place where people could really rely on it for really serious analysis and for serious debate. It's the accomplishments of others, what they've done with the data, the attorneys who take it up before the U.S. Supreme Court, the scholars who are looking at effective campaigns and how to tweak systems so that there are, the small donor incentives, so we can shift the incentives in our system to make it more welcoming for donors, more welcoming and ultimately more welcoming for voters. So our small successes getting the data together, this big puzzle, was just the beginning of what has flourished around the country, people using the data for deep analysis of our system and hopefully making it better.
What kind of lag time difference from the first round to now? I mean, right now, if I were to look, I could find out pretty significant data about this election cycle within the last 2 months or something?
That's correct. So, I mean, as you know, I've been doing this for, 25 years now. We started out before the internet, really. And getting data meant waiting for a 600-page paper report to be written, and we would run it through programs to create a database out of it. Well, in the ensuing years, as the internet developed and as technology developed, we're now able to get a significant amount of our data electronically, which means that we can go to a website, a state's website, we can download data, and it will process into our computers sometimes within a week. The lag time becomes less us processing than candidates actually filing the report. They often don't want to file reports. So, but when the state gets it, we can turn it around quickly. There are still a number of states that we have to actually manually enter the data. And those are the states that we focus on when we talk about bringing the infrastructure of our democracy into the 21st century. Electronic filing of reports, things like data visualizations, tagging donor data with contract data. This is the stuff that's coming at us and that we're enabling, is the idea that our government can be more accountable, our lawmakers can be more accountable, because we're putting information, the donor information, in a context that, if someone got a contract, then they can say, did they give them a donation? And hopefully all of this leads to a place where we all take a step back, have a mature discussion about what it is to represent people, how to have a good cost-benefit analysis about policy and who is affected, and make decisions based on what's best for the people, not necessarily what's best for a donor or an industry.
Now, there's a subtle thing out there. You focus on state data. So if someone's wanting to look at presidential expenditures, we don't even have the resource, it'll come on screen, but opensecrets.org, is that?
Opensecrets.org is our sister organization. And just to clarify, we actually added federal data.
Okay. See, I'm behind the times.
From the 2000 election cycle forward, we've been adding federal data. But that said, I still send people to Open Secrets. Open Secrets, the Center for Responsive Politics, their website is Open Secrets, has been studying congressional and presidential campaign finances for over 30 years. They are what I call local knowledge. They are the experts about presidential and congressional races. We can never be that, and I never want to displace them. But we've had scholars who come to us and they say, we would like to have a data set that is from presidential down to governors and state legislatures for all 50 states, so that we can see the differences in donation trends at the federal level and the state level. The states all have different rules, campaign finance limits, reporting thresholds. So we are providing, say, the laboratory of our democracy. We're providing some of the raw materials that these scholars can use and judge how the changes that states are making, how they might affect federal politics and donating, and conversely, how things that are going on at the federal level might be implemented at the state level. So the empirical evidence that we're creating is hopefully driving our democracy. We like to say we're changing the ecology of our democracy, changing the view and keeping a 20-year horizon out there. The idea is that when that next generation comes in of lawmakers and the next generation after that, they're more tech savvy, they're more data savvy, they understand that there are extreme efficiencies to be had to make government better, more efficient, to be more responsive to the needs of people, and we're hoping our data is driving that.
Okay. Now, you're a nonpartisan group.
We are a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit, that's correct. We don't take a stand on anything except transparency. We will go in and argue that there should be more disclosure. And we actually work with a group called COGL, the Council on Governmental Ethics Laws. That is the umbrella group for elections administrators. And they invite us every year to their conference to showcase the work we're doing. These are people who are the head of those 50 different disclosure agencies. They love what we do because we're taking their data, adding value to it, and then presenting it to the public, putting it in context. So they're our friends. We work very much in a nonpartisan way. Our data is cited on the right side of the web as well as the left side of the web. Brookings Institute, Heritage Foundation, Cato have used our data, American Enterprise Institute, as well as labor unions, environmental organizations. So the data is verifiable. It's primary source. So if someone says, oh, you slant the data, we can say, well, go to the state website and look, and you will see, because we have very stringent standards for processing the data and for checking off that we're getting every single report that is filed by every candidate and committee in the states.
So as a longtime observer of this, what do you think of the current presidential election?
Well, again, as a nonpartisan organization, I have to sidestep a little bit. The scholars we work with say very much that the politics you have today is a symptom of the incentives that you have. So we have a process, we have a political process that in which money plays a major role. And because the money keeps playing more and more and more of a role, and the idea of winning keeps going on, the idea of the public interest is getting lost. So a lot of the work that scholars are doing now is try to shift the system to a place where there are more small dollar donors, there are more people voting, there are more people in the system. And that's where we hope our data can take us.
Okay. So a lot of people think that money is corrupting our system. Do you agree?
I would say that it is swaying our system in a way that it was never envisioned by our founding fathers. The idea of the Supreme Court just came out with a couple of decisions, and McCutcheon and Citizens United, and they said in one of those decisions the idea that a donor could expect to have some special treatment by a lawmaker is a natural piece of the political process. And so when some people are going to say, well, but that's corrupt. Corruption as you give someone a money and they vote for you or vote your way. That's against the law. The FBI everybody gets that. But the corrupting that's going on is less clear. You have in the case in Alaska, we had a lawmaker talk about being elected. He's elected on 5 or 6 issues, and his donors, he knows who the donors are who supports those issues, but he has to make decisions on hundreds of issues. And so he may come up to an issue and not know how to vote, but someone's given him a contribution, a major contribution. And he may say, well, this doesn't affect my district. I don't care one way or another on this. I'm going to vote the way the donor would like me to vote. That technically is corruption. He is acting in a way that the donor wants him to do. That's not actionable. The difference between actionable corruption and all the other corruption that's going on now, or what people perceive as corruption, or the appearance of impropriety, that's our system is overloaded with the appearance of impropriety. And some people call that corruption. I think our system has some serious problems, and I do hope that as we develop more of the accountability tools that we're working towards and others are working towards, that we can maybe bring the public back to a place where they were after World War II. The public trust in government was very high. We had just defeated an evil, a really nasty evil. Is it going to take us something like that for us to get back to a place where we actually trust government that builds roads, makes sure we have clean water, has sewers, our kids get educated, healthcare? I hope we don't. I hope the mature discussion that we can have down the road is one that our country gets to a place where we trust the government more to provide the services that governments do for everyone.
So let's finish up on solutions. What's what do you see as the solutions to this? How are you guys working on that?
There are all kinds of solutions being debated. And the ones that I think that are resonating the most. I mean, you can change the contribution limits, which in that fighting battles in court, you can do all kinds of things. But getting back to the idea of incentives, there's a conservative group using our data, the Campaign Finance Institute, and full disclosure, Michael Malbin is on my board. He comes from a conservative background. He believes in the country as a republic, small r. He's worked on something called small donor incentives. And it's not new. New York City has been doing this for 20 years. The idea is that there can be a pool of money, and it doesn't have to be a large amount of money, relatively speaking, that a candidate can go to a donor, and that donor can give them $50, give the candidate $50. That candidate can then go and apply for another $300. So that small dollar donor looks like a $350 donor. That gives the candidate the incentive to talk to small donors, and the small donor a reason to give to the candidate. Changing the incentives, so candidates are talking to people, people are giving to candidates and talking to them. The idea of offering that to candidates. The latest thing is the idea of offering that to political parties, which have often been a conduit to bring people into the system, both candidates and people who want to be part of the process. Say, political party goes out, if they, if they register 500 voters in their district, then they could get an incentive for registering more voters. So the idea that we can shift the incentives in our system to a place where we're talking about bringing more donors in, and the small dollar donors can offset the major donors. Michael Malbin's research has shown that. The idea of bringing more small dollar donors in, increasing the dialogue between candidates and people, I think is holistically a solution that is finding broad support on both sides of the aisle.
Any other solutions come to mind here?
Oh, I always have to talk about the Australia solution, things like mandatory voting. If you had, Australia has mandatory voting. If you don't vote, it's basically a parking ticket. But the idea that right now our parties are marketing themselves to one side or the other, the extremes, they're pretty much ignoring this 70% in the middle. Well, and if they had to actually market themselves to the entire electorate, their messaging would change. I mean, if they have to talk to the mom who has 3 kids and still has to, get them to school and then get to work and have a job and go grocery shopping, that message is going to be very different than the far extreme on, one social issue or another social issue. So that's the Australia solution, mandatory voting. There's actually quite a bit of discussion about that sort of thing. The New Hampshire solution is the other one, that you create districts that are so small that everybody knows everybody. In some ways, Montana is like that. I mean, we're 800,000 people. We really are a pretty small city, relatively speaking. And you and I have been around the state long enough. We know people in all corners of the state. And so it's that kind of personal relationship that New Hampshire, because it has 450 different districts, when candidates debate, they go to the town hall. And everybody shows up, and all 50 of them. They show up and they talk and say, well, Joe might be a good candidate. This is why I'm different from him. I think of Francis Bardno up in Chinook, was famous for sitting at the county fair and having a debate with his Stevenson, and just saying, yeah, he's a good guy, I know him, he'd make a good lawmaker, but this is why I'm a better lawmaker. It's that kind of relationships that we've lost. Maybe it's technology, maybe it's television, but getting back to a place like that. And I think both small donors, changing getting more voters in, changing the culture of our democracy are essential to hopefully a healthier democracy in the future.
Great. Changing the culture of our democracy, I think, is a great phrase to end on. With politics, we can probably talk forever, but we do need to wrap up. So thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you guys for tuning in and listening to us.
Thanks for having me.